Hello friends, welcome back. First of all, tell me where in the world you're watching my video from. The morning began like every other morning had for nearly 3 decades. Quiet, predictable, safe. Rain tapped gently against the narrow workshop windows, each droplet sliding down the glass like it had somewhere more important to be. Inside, the air smelled of old wood and fresh dust, the familiar perfume of a life built with hands instead of words. Matthew Parker stood at his workbench, sanding the leg of a mahogany table, moving with the slow confidence of muscle memory. At 56, his body no longer rushed anything. His hands already knew how much pressure to apply, when to ease back, when to let the grain guide him. This shop had been his refuge since everything else fell apart. 30 years earlier, it had been filled with laughter, with a woman's voice, with dreams of a growing family. Now held only him and his son, Ethan, when he stopped by after work, and the soft hum of routine that kept loneliness quiet enough to tolerate. The phone rang. Matthew ignored it at first. The old landline rarely brought anything urgent. Customers usually left messages. But it rang again, and again. Something in his chest tightened, a warning he couldn't explain. He wiped his hands on his apron and picked up the receiver. Parker Woodworks. The voice on the other end was calm. Too calm. Mr. Parker, this is Detective Mark Reynolds with Madison Police Department. The word detective froze him. Yes, Matthew said, already standing straighter. We need you to come down to the station. His pulse quickened. Is this about my son? There was a pause. A careful one. Your son is fine, sir. Matthew exhaled sharply, relief flooding him, but it didn't last. This concerns your daughter. The world tilted. My daughter, he repeated, convinced he'd misheard. Yes, sir. That's not possible, Matthew said quickly. I only have one child. My son, Ethan. I don't have a daughter. Silence filled the line, heavy, deliberate. Mr. Parker, the detective said at last, please come to the station. If you're unable, we can send officers to bring you. But this conversation can't continue over the phone. The call ended before Matthew could ask another question. He stood there, receiver pressed to his ear, listening to nothing but the hollow buzz of dead air. A daughter. The word echoed through his skull like a mistake that refused to correct itself. Rain struck harder against the windows now, as if the weather had sensed something shifting. 20 minutes later, Matthew walked into the Madison Police Department with his jacket still damp and his thoughts completely unraveled. The station smelled of disinfectant and stale coffee, a scent that always meant bad news. He was led down a narrow hallway and into a gray conference room with no windows and fluorescent lights that hummed faintly overhead. Detective Reynolds sat across from him, joined by a younger female officer who offered a polite but somber nod. Mr. Parker, Reynolds said gently, thank you for coming in. Matthew didn't sit. You said I have a daughter. Reynolds studied him for a moment, then slid a photograph across the table. Matthew reached for it. The moment his fingers touched the glossy surface, his breath vanished. The girl in the photo was in her early 20s, dark hair falling loosely around her face, serious eyes, a faint cleft in her chin. It was like staring at his son, except unmistakably female. His heart slammed against his ribs. His voice broke. That's Ethan's face. Reynolds nodded slowly. Her name is Raina Parker. She's 22 years old. Matthew's legs weakened. He finally sat down. She was reported missing 3 days ago. Missing. The word struck harder than the photograph. We found your name among her personal belongings, Reynolds continued, along with adoption records. Matthew shook his head, almost violently. No, that's wrong. My wife and I had one child. A son. My wife told me our daughter died hours after birth. The female officer spoke softly. The records indicate a twin birth. A male and a female. The female infant was released for adoption 3 days later. Matthew gripped the edge of the table so hard his knuckles went white. For 22 years, he had mourned a baby girl whose tiny body he was never allowed to see. For 22 years, he had carried a grief with no face. And now, she had been alive the entire time. She was adopted by James and Linda Cooper of Nebraska, Reynolds said. They raised her as their own. Matthew stared at the photo again, his vision blurring. I had a daughter, he whispered. For 22 years. Reynolds nodded. Yes, sir. A beat passed. Then another. There's more, the detective said. Matthew's stomach dropped. Raina had recently discovered she was adopted. Reynolds continued. She hired a private investigator and began searching for her biological family. We found her journal in her apartment. He slid a notebook forward. The last entry mentions meeting someone named Savannah Sheffield 3 days ago. The name hit Matthew like a punch. Savannah. His ex-wife. She used to be Savannah Bradford, Matthew said hoarsely. She left when Ethan was 3 months old. I haven't seen her since. Sheffield is her married name now, Reynolds said. She's married to Douglas Harrington. They live here in Madison. Matthew's pulse thundered in his ears. Mr. Parker, Reynolds said carefully, we believe Raina confronted her birth mother. Shortly afterward, she disappeared. The room felt smaller, hotter, sharper. There were signs of a struggle in her apartment. The detective continued. Her phone and laptop were taken. Matthew stared at the tabletop, unable to breathe properly. My wife told me my daughter died, he said. She let me believe that for 22 years. Reynolds' voice softened. I'm sorry, sir. The word sorry felt useless. What do you think happened to her? Matthew asked. Reynolds met his eyes. We believe she was taken. Something inside Matthew cracked. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a quiet, irreversible break. His life before this moment ceased to exist. The workshop, the routines, the safety of ignorance, all gone. I need to call my son, Matthew said. Reynolds nodded. Of course. Ethan arrived 20 minutes later, breathless and confused, backpack still slung over one shoulder. Dad, what's going on? He asked, panic flickering behind his eyes. Matthew couldn't find the words. Reynolds slid the photo toward him instead. Ethan stared at it, then froze. That's me, he whispered. That's my face. It's your sister, Matthew said quietly. Your twin. The color drained from Ethan's skin. I don't have a. She was given away, Matthew said. Your mother lied. The truth settled between them, like something alive. She's missing, Reynolds added. We believe she confronted your mother 3 days ago. Ethan gripped the chair behind him, breathing hard. My mom knew, he said. She knew I had a sister. Reynolds continued, his tone firm. Your mother and her husband have been under investigation for years. Financial fraud. Targeting vulnerable widowers. 8 confirmed victims. Con artists, Ethan said flatly. Reynolds nodded. Then he played the audio clip. Raina's voice filled the room. Nervous, searching real. I just want to understand why. The recording cut abruptly. Ethan slammed his palm on the table. That's her, he said. That's my sister. We're pursuing every lead, Reynolds said. But I need you both to stay out of this. Matthew stood. No. Reynolds stiffened. Mr. Parker, my daughter is missing, Matthew said, his voice dangerously calm. And I just learned she existed 3 hours ago. I'm not sitting at home waiting. Outside the station, clouds pressed low over the city. Ethan's voice trembled. I had a twin. All this time. Matthew placed a hand on his shoulder. We're going to find her. As they walked into the rain, neither of them realized this was only the beginning. That the lie that stole 22 years was about to demand blood, truth, and everything they had left. And somewhere in the darkness, a young woman who had searched her whole life for family was waiting, believing, somehow, that they were finally coming. The house felt wrong that night. Not empty, haunted. Matthew sat at the kitchen table long after midnight, staring at the grain in the wood, as if it might rearrange itself into answers. The clock ticked too loudly. The refrigerator hummed like a distant engine. Every ordinary sound felt obscene against what he now knew. A daughter, 22 years alive somewhere in the world while he built furniture and fixed leaky sinks and attended parent teacher meetings for a son who never knew he'd been born with half his soul missing. Across the room, Ethan sat on the couch, elbows on his knees, his hands locked together so tightly his knuckles had gone pale. She chose, he said suddenly. Matthew looked up. She chose me. Ethan continued. She kept me and gave her away. There was no anger in his voice yet, just shock trying to understand its own shape. Matthew swallowed. Your mother always wanted control. She talked about the life she deserved. I didn't realize what that meant until now. Ethan shook his head slowly. How do you just erase a child? Matthew had no answer. Silence returned, thick, suffocating, until Ethan pressed his hand to his chest. Dad, he said quietly. Matthew's stomach tightened. What is it? I feel something. He frowned. Like pressure. Not pain. Just presence. Matthew studied his son carefully. You're in shock, he said gently. That can do strange things. But Ethan shook his head. It's still there, he whispered. Like someone standing right behind my heart. Matthew didn't say what he was thinking. Twins, some said. Shared bond science couldn't explain. Stories dismissed as coincidence. Myths whispered by grieving families. Yet as he watched his son's face, pale, frightened, sincere, he felt something shift inside him. Across the city, somewhere cold and dark, his daughter was alive. And maybe she was trying to be heard. They didn't sleep. At dawn, Matthew drove them to Murphy's pub, the one place left in his life untouched by lies. Patrick Murphy had been his brother in everything but blood since high school. The bar itself was something Matthew had built with his own hands 20 years earlier. Oak counters, reinforced beams, joints fitted so tightly they'd outlast them both. Patrick was wiping down the bar when he looked up and saw them. His smile vanished instantly. Jesus, he said softly. What happened? He locked the doors before Matthew even spoke. Inside the dim warmth of the empty pub, Matthew told him everything. The police, the photo, Savannah, the adoption, the missing girl. Patrick's jaw clenched harder with every word. I never trusted her, he said when Matthew finished. Not once. Not at your wedding. Not ever. You couldn't have known, Matthew said. I should have said something, Patrick replied. And I won't stay silent again. He poured 3 whiskeys without asking. What do you need? The police are moving too slow, Matthew said. And Savannah's husband, Douglas Harrington, they've been running this game for years. Patrick listened as Ethan explained the fraud, the victims, the pattern. Widowers. Lonely people. Large sums. Vanishing accounts. Patrick's eyes darkened. I fit that profile, he said quietly. Matthew looked at him. My wife died 5 years ago. Patrick continued. Cancer. Savannah knew me when I was a bartender with nothing. She doesn't know what I am now. 5 pubs. Real estate holdings. Liquidity. The perfect bait. When do we start? Patrick asked. Tomorrow. That night, the workshop changed. Computers replaced clamps. Maps covered walls once lined with chisels. The scent of sawdust mixed with electronics and caffeine. Ethan worked with a focus Matthew had never seen before. Fingers flying across keys, eyes hollow with purpose. She hired a private investigator, Ethan said. Carol Jensen. I found her cloud backup. Files bloomed across the screen. 8 confirmed victims. 1 suspicious death. James Cooper, Ethan said softly. Her adoptive father. Matthew's breath caught. Brake lines cut 6 years ago. Ethan continued. Ruled accident. Douglas questioned. Never charged. Patrick muttered a curse. And now? Matthew asked. Ethan pulled up another file. Howard Campbell. 62. Widower. $850,000 in savings. A note blinked on screen. Finalization in 5 days. Matthew closed his eyes. Another life on the edge of destruction. She was going to record them, Ethan said suddenly. Matthew looked at him. Raina. Ethan continued. She told the investigator she'd confront Savannah and record everything. But the police never found her phone, Matthew said. She wouldn't rely on 1 copy. Ethan replied. She was careful. Hope stirred. Fragile. Dangerous. They followed property records next. Douglas Harrington owned a warehouse on East Washington Avenue, through a shell company. It has a basement, Ethan said. The word echoed. That night they went. The warehouse loomed like a dead animal under broken streetlights. Patrick stayed in the car while Matthew and Ethan approached on foot. A new padlock gleamed against rusted metal. Inside, dust and silence ruled, except when Ethan stopped suddenly. She was here, he whispered. Matthew felt it too. Not something mystical, but instinct screaming recognition. They found a basement door. Locked. Headlights swept the exterior. They hid. A security patrol checked the building, then left. We can't break in, Matthew said grimly. If we do, they'll move her. Or kill her. Ethan's face crumpled. She's right there. I know. Back in the car, Ethan pressed his hand to his chest again. She's cold, he whispered. There are pipes. Water sounds. Matthew believed him. 3 days left. The trap had to be perfect. The next morning, Patrick walked into a grief support group wearing an expensive suit, the mask of a man Savannah hunted. Matthew listened through the wire as she approached. Her voice hadn't changed. Soft, empathetic, deadly. Within minutes, she had her hook in him. By Saturday afternoon, she introduced him to Douglas Harrington. By Sunday, the con was unfolding exactly as the files predicted. Charts, promises, trust manufactured on demand. Tuesday night, a charity gala. Public, witnesses, the safest place for predators who believe themselves untouchable. That night, Matthew couldn't sleep. One thought kept returning, obsessive, relentless. If Raina recorded Savannah, she would have hidden a backup. The next morning, he returned to her apartment. He searched like a craftsman, not hurried, not desperate, but intentional. Hidden seams, false bottoms. He picked up a worn stuffed bear from her bed. A loose stitch caught his eye. Inside, plastic, a memory card. When the audio played, the room seemed to stop breathing. Savannah's voice. Cold, casual. Douglas's voice. Commanding. Handle it like we did James Cooper. Matthew's knees buckled. She's alive, Savannah had said later. We're just keeping her quiet. The warehouse. The basement. Matthew called Detective Reynolds. We move tomorrow, he said. Public confrontation, Matthew insisted. They'll panic. They'll talk. 24 hours. Ethan pressed his hand to his chest again that night. She knows, he whispered. She feels it. The clock was running out, and the monsters thought they were about to win. Tuesday arrived without mercy. Cold air crept through Madison like a warning, sharp enough to sting the lungs. The sky hung low and colorless, as if even daylight was reluctant to witness what was coming. Matthew stood in his workshop before dawn, hands resting on the same scarred bench where he had built half his life. But today, his hands were steady for a different reason. This was no longer about discovery. This was about ending something. Patrick arrived first, dressed in the tailored suit Savannah now associated with wealth and vulnerability. He looked every inch the man she believed she had already conquered. Beneath the fabric, the wire was taped carefully to his chest. The tiny transmitter blinked once, alive. You still good with this? Patrick asked quietly. Matthew met his eyes. If they sense fear, they'll retreat. If they sense confidence, they'll talk. Patrick gave a slow nod. Then I'll give them confidence. Ethan arrived last, hood pulled low, recording equipment concealed beneath his jacket. His face was pale, but resolute. She's awake, he said softly. Matthew's heart lurched. You can feel her. Ethan nodded. She's scared, but not alone anymore. Something changed. Matthew closed his eyes for a moment. Hold on, Raina. The Monona Terrace ballroom glowed like a jewel against the black surface of Lake Monona. Crystal chandeliers scattered light across silk dresses and polished shoes. 200 guests moved through the space with champagne flutes and careless laughter, unaware that beneath the elegance lay a reckoning. Predators thrived in rooms like this. Matthew adjusted his borrowed tie, expensive, unfamiliar, and followed Patrick inside. Across the room, Savannah Bradford stood radiant in emerald silk, every inch the philanthropist's wife. Time had refined her cruelty, sharpened it, taught it how to smile. She didn't recognize Matthew. That hurt more than he expected. RG, she said brightly, touching Patrick's arm. I'm so glad you came. This is my attorney, Patrick said smoothly, gesturing toward Matthew. Matthew. Savannah offered a polite glance. Dismissed him instantly. Douglas Harrington joined them moments later, silver-haired, confident, the kind of man people trusted without realizing why. Ready to finalize? Douglas asked. Patrick smiled. I am, but I want to do it properly. He took the microphone. The music died. Conversation stilled. 200 faces turned. Ladies and gentlemen, Patrick said, voice steady. Thank you for attending tonight. Before we continue, there's something I need to say. Savannah's smile faltered. My name is Robert Gregory Murphy, Patrick continued. But I'm not the man you believe I am. And I'm not here to invest. A murmur rippled. I'm here because these people try to steal my future, just like they've stolen from so many others. Matthew stepped forward. My name is Matthew Parker. Savannah's face drained of color. I was married to this woman 22 years ago, he said evenly. She told me my daughter died at birth. Gasps. She didn't. She gave her away. And when my daughter found her, she took her again. Douglas moved toward an exit. Police closed in. Ethan activated the speaker. You're about to hear my daughter's voice, Matthew said. Savannah lunged. Too late. The recording filled the room. Every word, every confession. When it ended, the silence was unbearable. Savannah broke first. She's alive, she sobbed. She's at the warehouse. East Washington, basement storage. We didn't hurt her. Douglas screamed at her to shut up. Handcuffs snapped closed. Detective Reynolds stepped forward. You're under arrest. As they were led away, Savannah looked at Matthew. I'm sorry, she whispered. He met her gaze, cold and unmoved. No, he said. You're not. His phone rang seconds later. We found her, Reynolds said. She's alive. The world blurred. Matthew didn't remember leaving the ballroom. Only the sound of Ethan's voice breaking as he said, She's asking for you. Police lights washed the warehouse in red and blue. In the basement, on a thin mattress, sat the daughter he had mourned for 22 years. She looked up at him. You're my father, she said. Matthew knelt. I'm here, he whispered. At last. The basement smelled of concrete and damp metal. It was the kind of place meant to erase people. Not violently, not loudly, but slowly. A place designed to make someone feel forgotten long before they actually were. Raina sat on the thin mattress with her knees drawn to her chest, wrapped in a single gray blanket. Her face was pale, her lips cracked from dehydration, but her eyes were alert, watching, measuring. The same eyes Matthew had seen every day in his son's face without ever knowing why they felt familiar. When he stepped into the room, she looked up. Recognition came instantly. Not confusion, not hesitation. Recognition. You're my father, she said, her voice rough but steady. Matthew stopped breathing. 22 years collapsed into that sentence. He knelt slowly, afraid that if he moved too fast she might disappear, like a dream that punishes belief. His knees touched the concrete, the cold seeping through his trousers, but he didn't feel it. I didn't know you existed, he said, the words tearing out of him. If I had, I would have found you. I swear I would have. Raina studied his face, searching for truth the way someone learns to do when lies have shaped their entire life. Then she nodded. You found me now, she said. That's what matters. Ethan was already beside her, gripping her hand, as if afraid the world might pull her away again. I felt you, he whispered. The cold. The pipes. You were trying to tell me where you were. She gave a weak smile. I didn't know if it was real. I just hoped. Matthew reached for her hand. His fingers trembled. You're safe, he said. You're home. For the first time since he'd learned her name, the word home didn't feel like a lie. At the hospital, doctors moved quietly around her, respectful in the way people become when they understand they're standing inside something sacred. Dehydration, bruising, trauma that would take time to surface properly. But she would live. That was everything. As dawn crept through the window, Raina slept between her father and her brother, breathing evenly, peacefully, the way she should have slept 22 years earlier. Matthew watched her chest rise and fall. Every breath felt like forgiveness he hadn't known he needed. Patrick stood in the doorway, arms crossed, eyes damp but smiling. Mission complete, he murmured. 6 months later, spring filled the workshop with light. The smell of sawdust returned, not as refuge, but as celebration. 3 workbenches now stood where one had once been. Matthew guided Raina's hands across a table leg, teaching her the same motion his father had taught him decades earlier. Even pressure, he said gently. Let the grain tell you where to go. Across the room, Ethan looked up from his own project. She's just showing off because Uncle Patrick's watching. Patrick laughed loudly from the corner, coffee in hand. She's smart. Performs better with an audience. Raina rolled her eyes and nudged her brother. I can tell when you're in a bad mood before you say anything. Ethan shot back. That's not a twin thing, she replied. That's you being annoying. Laughter filled the workshop. Real laughter, warm and effortless. The kind Matthew thought he'd never hear again. The trial ended a month later. Savannah Bradford and Douglas Harrington were convicted on every charge: fraud, kidnapping, conspiracy, accessory in James Cooper's death. Their empire collapsed publicly and permanently. The stolen money was recovered. Howard Campbell started a scholarship fund in James Cooper's name. Justice didn't feel triumphant. It felt quiet, necessary. One afternoon, Raina paused her sanding and looked up. I still dream about the basement sometimes, she admitted. Matthew placed a hand on her shoulder. Healing isn't a straight line. She nodded, then smiled. Is this good, Dad? He examined the wood carefully. Smooth grain, perfect pressure. Perfect, he said. Her grin mirrored Ethan's exactly. Genetic. Outside, sunlight warmed the street. Inside, surrounded by his children's voices, Matthew finally understood what had been stolen from him and what had been returned. Not the years, but the future. And that was enough.